Anyone who is even vaguely familiar with church music and popular Christian music is probably familiar with the song Revelation Song. Released in 2009, Jenny Lee Riddle's hit song reached #1 on Christian charts in August of that year. It has been performed by countless bands and churches, and it has been recorded and re-recorded by tons of artists. Here we are 8 years later, still hearing the song quite often. Revelation Song has literally been the church's free bird for the last decade. To the average listener, Revelation Song is just another epic worship power ballad, but to all of us church musicians who have played it countless times, Revelation Song may be a bit of a source of argument. There's nothing controversial about the song, just the chord progression. As cool as it is, nobody seems to agree where the one chord is. That is, no one can agree how we label the key of the song. It is often discussed as D, A minor, C, G, or C, G minor, B flat, F. Just talking in chord names, because things get confusing when we throw the Nashville number system on top of this progression. By the way, just a disclaimer here, I'll be speaking in the Nashville number system a lot here because it is the easiest way to illustrate these different possible scenarios when trying to label key. Also, for simplicity's sake, I will be discussing the chord progression as starting on a C major chord. For our illustration purposes, our chord progression for Revelation Song will be C, G minor, B flat, F. I'm going to demonstrate a few different arguments for different key labelings on the song, starting with what I call the Must-Stay-Diatonic argument. From there, we'll take a look at the Implied Tonic Theory and the Modal Theory. So let's get started. I call this first argument the Must-Stay-Diatonic argument because it basically states that whatever key we pick for the progression must directly allow for these exact chords. Now, this is not an official music theory argument. This is rather an argument I hear people present when speaking of these types of chord progressions. I think it makes sense to a lot of people, which is why I'm including it here. What I mean by Must-Stay-Diatonic is that something like a major 2 or a flat 7 wouldn't be allowed because those chords are either secondary dominants or are modal. We need to pick a key that allows for that random G minor chord and that odd B flat major chord, according to this argument. Both of those chords incorporate a B flat, and what key has B flat in it? F major. So we can claim F major here for this progression, and it seems to work fine. Numbering the chords now gives us 5, 2, 4, 1. C is our 5 chord, G minor is our 2 chord, B flat is our 4 chord, and F is our 1 chord. We have successfully found a key that allows all 4 of these chords to be diatonic. That is, chords that are derived from the notes of the key, which is the F major scale in this case. Now, keep this in your head because we're going to circle back to it in a minute. The second argument I'm going to call the Implied Tonic Theory. Basically, this means that if you start a song with a particular chord, the listener's brain will at least temporarily regard that opening chord as tonic. And that's the 1. When I say tonic, I'm talking about the 1 chord. If I sit down at the piano and play a random chord for you, you don't know its function at all. You don't know its function within a key, and it might as well be a 1 chord. So this school of thought, as applied to Revelation Song, will say that the 1 chord would be the C major chord because it's the first chord in the progression. Even though the C chord is followed by strange chords, the brain holds it there as a resolution chord, so that when it comes back around, it feels like a resolution. This progression is one of those sort of circular progressions that doesn't feel like it fully resolves, but the first chord's strength allows it to hold the place of a 1. This argument, however, is in direct contradiction with what we first said in the Must-Stay-Diatonic argument. This argument is saying that the C major chord is a 1, not the F major chord. So let's look at another argument. We'll call this one the Modal Theory. The thing is, with a chord progression as weird as this one, we have to look into some modes to hopefully resolve this issue. Without trying to go into a bunch of music theory detail involving listing out a whole bunch of modes, I'll cut to the chase and throw out there the mode I'm thinking of. Even if you have no idea what I'm talking about, I'll try to make this simple. So Mixolydian mode is a mode where we are altering a scale degree of our major scale, in this case, the 7th scale degree. In Mixolydian, the 7th scale degree is lowered to a flat 7. This means that all the notes of the C major scale, for instance, are still the same, except that our B is now a B flat. This is exactly what we need for this particular progression. This mode gives us C, D, E, F, G, A, B flat, C, and allows perfectly for the G minor chord and the B flat major chord. Now the really interesting thing about mixolydian, however, is that it has no leading tone. In case you're not familiar with that term, the leading tone is the note that leads up to the one chord. It's the note that really wants to resolve. In the case of C major, this is B. A regular major 5 chord contains a leading tone. That would be G, B, D in the key of C. And that's why a 5 chord always wants to resolve to the 1. Sometimes ending a song on a 5 can be really unsettling because of that. Without a leading tone though, it's harder to pin down the 1 chord. There's less of that for sure, firm kind of resolution without the half-step lead up that a leading tone provides. The next interesting thing about mixolydian is that by flattening the 7th scale degree, not only do we lose our leading tone, we also gain a subdominant. That is a chord functioning as a 4 chord. So it's looking like this progression possibly has 2 4 chords and no leading tone, and definitely no major 5 chord. So this is supporting that point a minute ago about this being a circular progression that just never fully resolves. If this isn't ironic enough, every mixolydian mode has a related major scale. That related scale is always a 5th below the mixolydian key. That means that our related major key to C mixolydian is none other than F major, which is the key we talked about in our first argument earlier. We've now come full circle as this seems to get crazier and crazier, so let's step back for a second and review our options. Back to the Must-Stay-Diatonic argument, arguing for F major. It seems like we've proven that this could be our key, but I don't think it could be, and here's why. If this Revelation song chord progression were in the key of F, E would be functioning as our leading tone, because it's the 7th scale degree in the key of F major. But it's not functioning that way at all. We never find an E resolving to an F in this progression. As a matter of fact, we're going in the opposite direction from an F major chord to a C major chord, and the C major chord never feels the need to resolve to F major. Instead, the opposite is true. I don't feel like we can pin this as the key without a strong leading tone. On top of that, we have to ask ourselves, does the F major chord at the end of the progression feel like a resolution? Imagine reaching the end of the song and hanging on the F instead of going back to C. It's gonna feel weird. Maybe it's a cool, less predictable way to end the song, but in that scenario, you're definitely not resolving the progression. You're doing that to do something different, like ending a song on a 4 chord or a 5 chord in order to be less predictable or cheesy. So where does this leave us? What key is Revelation song in? So back to the stuff about mixolydian. On paper, mixolydian doesn't really allow for a clear resolution because of the lack of a leading tone, but that's on paper. Sometimes when analyzing key, we just have to give in and use our ears. Imagine that, musicians using our ears. Like I alluded to a second ago, the progression wants to resolve to C major. It feels like it's just left there hanging if we finish on an F, which definitely wouldn't be the case if the song were in F major. We have proven on paper that the song could be in C mixolydian, and when we listen we also hear that C mixolydian most definitely makes sense. Maybe that's partly because of the whole implied tonic theory, where the first chord in the progression ends up feeling like tonic. Maybe it's the melody of the song. The melody, which starts on an E in the verses and choruses, fits well with C major and really helps make that feel like home base. I believe that Revelation song is in the mixolydian key of the first chord in the progression. So if we started with the C major chord, we're in C mixolydian. If we were in a totally different key and say started with an E major chord, we're in E mixolydian. In this particular song and chord progression, the first chord of the song is the key of the song. The music theory evidence, in addition to the aural evidence, what we can hear, point to this conclusion. Whether you fully agree or disagree with my arguments here, I hope this has helped clear up any confusion surrounding this possibly confusing chord progression. This is one of those music discussions that can be very ambiguous, so feel free to let me know what you think in the comments below. Tell me how you determine the key of Revelation song. And lastly, if you feel like this video was worth your subscription and you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, please let me know by subscribing. I would greatly appreciate that. Also, leave a comment, share with a friend, and be sure to give it a thumbs up. Thanks everyone for watching, and I will see you next week.